At 34, I'm still living at my childhood home with my mother. It's been 3 years since my father passed away, and I decided to stay here because I didn't want to leave her alone. During these years, we had unwelcome visitors, my brother Bob and his wife Jane. I've known Bob since his birth, and Jane, his middle school classmate, has been around almost as long. They've been a couple since then, and Bob would bring Jane home for vacations, so I got to know her quite well. To put it plainly, they've left a lasting impression on me, and not a good one. They used to bully me for fun. Our parents, both busy with their careers, were often away on weekends, and that's when Bob and Jane's torment would peak. We lived in a large mansion built by my father, a CEO. During those unsupervised times, Bob and Jane would trick me into playing hide and seek, only to trap me in a closet. They would cram it with stuff, making it impossible for me to get out. I'd be stuck there until just before our parents came home, and then I'd be punished for the mess in the closet. One day, my mother came home early and caught Bob and Jane in the act. She was furious, and after that, I was never locked in the closet again. However, the harassment didn't stop. I resented my parents for their absence and felt a deep-seated anger towards Bob and Jane. But as I grew older, my resentment also extended to my parents for not stepping in sooner. By middle school, their cruelty escalated. Bob and Jane shredded my school uniform, defaced nearly all my textbooks, and destroyed my cushions and bedding. Their relentless torment was a painful reminder of how little support I had received growing up. Later, I discovered that Bob and Jane, who were high school students at the time, had performed poorly on their final exams and had been scolded by their parents. It seemed that their anger and frustration had fueled their cruel revenge on me. I was left stunned in my devastated room, overwhelmed with questions. Why was I enduring this? Why was no one coming to my aid? I stood there, lost in these thoughts, until my mother came to call me for dinner. When she saw the state of my room, she screamed in horror. My father rushed in as well. Bob, the last to arrive, struggled to contain his laughter, occasionally letting out a chuckle. Confronted by my shocked parents, I cried out, "Mom, Dad, I want to leave this house." Tears streamed down my face as I continued, "No one is helping me. Bob and Jane are always so mean. My toys, my study materials, my clothes, they're all ruined. I don't want to live like this anymore. I hate both of you. You're not helping me." It was the first time I had cried so openly in front of my family. Until that moment, I had silently endured and wept quietly in my struggles. But now, I sobbed loudly like a child. Seeing my distress, my mother hugged me tightly, apologizing for everything that had happened. Even Bob, witnessing the severity of the situation, appeared to understand the gravity and tried to leave. But my father stopped him by grabbing him by the collar. "Do you realize what you've done? This is criminal," my father said, his voice low but filled with intensity. Bob protested, "Oh, come on, it's just an exaggeration. We were only playing around." "Destruction of property is a crime," my father retorted. "You understand you need to make amends, right?" "But Catherine is family," Bob argued weakly. Bob's attempt to downplay his actions with, "I'm a minor. Minors can't be criminals, right?" was met with a deep sigh from my father. "Yes, a minor like you might not be able to pay for the damage," my father said, "but it's up to the parents to address the consequences. If you can't make amends, we will have to. We also bear responsibility for raising you this way. I think it's time for you to go live with your uncle." My uncle, my father's younger brother, was a stern figure who had a reputation for disliking dishonesty. He was feared by the neighborhood kids, almost like a boogeyman. He was kind to well-behaved children, including me, but had no patience for troublemakers like Bob and Jane. Bob, of course, was terrified of the idea. "No way. I don't want to live with Uncle. I promise I won't do this again." My father's voice was resolute. "You've made that promise before. When you and Jane locked Catherine in the closet, chased her around, and threw bugs at her knowing she's afraid of them, each time you promised to change. But you never did." He continued, "We cannot keep someone who hurts our family, even if they are family. Never set foot in this house again." With that, my father grabbed Bob by the scruff of his neck and dragged him out. Later, I learned that my parents had been deeply upset by Bob's behavior. Despite their scolding, Bob still didn't seem to grasp why he was being punished. Bob continued his annoying antics against me, and I began to think he was beyond help. It seemed there were people in the world who couldn't grasp even the basic rules of society, and Bob and Jane were prime examples. Initially, Bob had planned to attend university on our father's dime after finishing high school. But my father told him that someone like Bob would likely end up causing trouble even in university. As a result, Bob ended up working at our uncle's company right after graduation. It became clear that Bob was desperate to escape our uncle's rigid environment. Shortly after high school, he and Jane, who had also just graduated, rented an apartment together. They began their new life with the understanding that neither their parents nor their uncle would help with rent or living expenses. Soon after moving out, Bob asked me to lend him some money. At the time, I had just started high school and wasn't working part-time. The money I had saved up, which Bob had previously stolen when he lived at home, had been fully reimbursed by my parents as I had documented everything meticulously in a notebook. Although I had the money, I had no intention of giving it to him. I told Bob, "Aren't you ashamed to ask your high school-aged sister for money? I'm not even working, so I don't have any extra funds. There's no way I'm giving you any." After that, I informed both my mother and father about Bob's request for money. They were furious and vowed not to provide any further assistance. I felt it was best for Bob and Jane to fend for themselves without relying on others. Since then, I focused on my studies and worked hard to go to college. I dedicated myself to my studies throughout college and, after graduation, joined a company where I continued to grow and learn. My busy life made me completely forget about Bob. That is, until an invitation to his wedding arrived at our house. I saw that Jane, with whom Bob had been living, was the bride. I thought, so they're finally getting married. My parents and I discussed whether we should attend the wedding of a family member. However, just a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. He had always been fragile, but this was the first time he had collapsed so severely. Both my mother and I were frantic and immediately called for an ambulance. In the midst of the chaos, I reached out to Bob, only to be met with a dismissive response. "I'm about to get married. Don't call me during this crucial period of my bachelorhood," he said. When I informed him of our father's emergency hospitalization, he shrugged it off, saying, "He just tripped, didn't he? Make sure to come to my wedding." And with that, he hung up. Shortly after, our father passed away. With both the wake and funeral inevitable, my mother and I had to inform Bob that we wouldn't be able to attend his wedding. Despite his insistence that we come, we decided to stay home. We also informed Jane's parents about our father's passing and our inability to attend the wedding. While Jane's parents understood our situation, Bob and Jane criticized us for not coming, calling our absence disrespectful. The messages left on my mother's and my voicemail were so absurd that it made me question who the real rude ones were. Bob and Jane accused us of being disrespectful, claiming that we were trying to ruin their wedding, despite all the effort we had put into it. While my mother and I were occupied with arranging the funeral, Bob and Jane proceeded with their wedding as if our father's death was an afterthought. After that, my mother and I chose not to discuss the situation further, but it was clear that our relationship with my brother had been irrevocably damaged. Then, unexpectedly, Bob showed up at our doorstep. When I answered the intercom and heard, "I've got a delivery," I was taken aback to see Bob and Jane standing there. The monitor had only shown their silhouettes, so I was unprepared for their arrival. As soon as I opened the door, they barged in with large pieces of luggage, pushing me aside. Hey, what's the rush?" I protested. It seemed Bob had completely ignored our father's final command to never set foot in our house again. Bob and Jane rudely entered, dumped their luggage in the hallway, and began speaking to me without any regard for decency. "You and Mom need to leave this house immediately," Bob declared. "What?" I responded, shocked. "Isn't Mom diagnosed with dementia? This mansion isn't suited for someone like her or a loser like you who never improves," Bob continued. "A place like this should belong to glamorous people like Jane and me. So you need to get out right away." I was stunned. What on earth was my brother talking about? After 3 years since our father's death, he hadn't offered an apology, visited the grave, or made any effort to mend things. And now, he was demanding the mansion. To make matters worse, he presumed her mother had dementia and was planning to evict her. I was left speechless. Just then, our mother emerged from a room at the back. "Catherine, what's going on?" she asked, her confusion evident. When she saw my brother and Jane, she said something that left me even more bewildered. "Oh, who might you be? If you're a stranger, please leave," she said. Bob and Jane burst into mocking laughter. "See," Bob said, "this is how she acts every time we call her. Her dementia must be getting worse." I'll leave it to you to take care of Mom, Bob said dismissively. You can have her. I'll take the mansion. After all, I'm the eldest son, so it's only right that I get the mansion. With that, Bob strode deeper into the house. Jane, mimicking Bob's demeanor, turned to me and our mother, saying, "Take the old lady and get out. I never want to see you again." I rushed to my mother's side, asking, "Mom, are you okay?" Feeling as though we were being forcibly evicted, my mother and I left the mansion, abandoning all the old furniture behind. We gathered our personal belongings and fled the house. Fortunately, a friend of mine, who was abroad and unable to manage his house, offered it to us. His cousin had been looking after it, but with his imminent transfer to another state next year, it seemed like perfect timing for us to use it. When we arrived at the house and set down our luggage, a sense of relief washed over us. We took a moment to breathe deeply and relax. Then my mother said with a hint of humor, "We've left that house, and I still can't stand how Bob and Jane acted. Maybe we should just sell it." I took the opportunity to ask the question that had been on my mind. "Bob said you have dementia, Mom. What's that about?" "Oh, that," she said, her tone reflective. "About 2 years ago, Bob and Jane began frequently asking me for money. They didn't attend their father's funeral or contact me afterward. I was baffled by their nerve to ask for money after treating me so poorly. So every time they called, I pretended not to recognize them and said, 'Who? I don't know you. You're a stranger to me, right?' It seemed Bob and Jane misunderstood my mother's indifference. They interpreted her treatment of them as forgetting who they were, assuming she genuinely had dementia because she no longer wanted anything to do with them. Regardless, I felt it was wrong to evict someone you believe has dementia. My mother quickly decided to move forward with selling the mansion. We had discussed selling the large mansion ever since our father passed away, and we were left living there alone. At that time, one of the executives from my father's company, where I am currently undergoing training as a successor, had expressed interest in buying the mansion if we decided to sell. So the buyer was essentially confirmed. We just needed to handle the formalities. When I spoke with a real estate acquaintance and explained the situation to the executive, they agreed that if we left Bob and Jane alone, the house could fall into serious disrepair. Something needed to be done quickly. A week later, my smartphone rang incessantly, and my mother's phone was also blowing up. There were numerous calls from Bob to my mother's phone and from Jane to mine. They probably wanted to discuss the same issue, but we found their attempts amusing and chose to ignore them for a while. We enjoyed our tea and chatted, letting an hour pass without noticing. It seemed Bob and Jane had been trying to reach us the entire time. When I finally answered the call, Jane exclaimed, "Finally, why didn't you pick up sooner? There's a huge problem. The house has been taken over." "Wait a minute," I said. "Didn't you two take over the house? I think we're the ones who should be saying we've been taken over." "No," Jane said, sounding panicked. "Bob and I took over the mansion, but now strangers have come and are demanding we leave. They've barged in and are trying to kick us out. Our mansion has been taken over." I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I was tempted to tell her that they were the ones who had unlawfully occupied the house in the first place. Chuckling, I replied, "You're talking about being taken over, but you're not even the legal owners. My mother, the rightful owner, sold the house to someone else. So the strangers you're talking about are the new owners, and you need to move out." "What?" "She sold it. But this mansion belongs to Bob." Jane was in shock. "When did anyone say that?" "Well, no one explicitly said it," I answered, "but Bob is the eldest son. Isn't it assumed that this house, along with the property and the company, would eventually be his? And that Jane would live elegantly as the CEO's wife in this mansion?" Despite everything, Jane was frantic and struggled to grasp the situation. I burst out laughing again. The fact that Jane thought Bob would automatically inherit the mansion and become the CEO of the company just because he was the eldest son was astonishing. Such naive thinking. Given Jane's firm belief, Bob likely shared the same misguided expectations about inheriting both the mansion and the company, despite no one ever promising him either. I laughed again at her absurd assumptions. "Bob as a CEO? You as the CEO's wife? How could you even entertain such fantasies? You're both still low-level employees at the company where you first started without any plans or education to succeed in the business." Jane was clearly taken aback by my words. Stunned, she retorted, "In that case, I'll just inherit the company from Uncle." I laughed even harder. You should at least check the company's personnel announcements. My uncle's cousin's son became the president last month. What? Jane was in disbelief. So there's no chance for Bob to become CEO, and I can't be the CEO's wife. That's correct, I confirmed. Can I hang up now? I don't think I need to talk to strangers anymore. Wait, please, Catherine, give us some money, Jane pleaded. Well, goodbye then, I said, ending the call. Later, I heard from my uncle about what happened next. Bob and Jane refused to leave the mansion, clinging to the pillars and stubbornly refusing to go. My uncle had to come and pick them up himself. It seems their strict training at my uncle's company had scared them so much that they cried when he took them away. They were placed at a mountain retreat owned by one of my uncle's acquaintances because they proved too unpredictable to be left on their own. My uncle warned them that if they didn't improve at the retreat, they might never leave the mountain. Despite this warning, they attempted to escape multiple times but were caught each time. As for me, the person handling the house management is my fiancé, who is currently working abroad. I'm living in his parents' house while he completes his long-term assignment. He plans to end his assignment this year and will soon be planning our wedding. My mother and uncle, who have helped us so much, will be invited to the wedding, but of course, Bob and Jane will not.